as you see former President Trump leave court right now, Sandra.
These are articles that were over the last day and a half. They're very good articles. They say the case is a sham and it shouldn't even be tried. It shouldn't have been submitted. And I don't even know if you're allowed to put them in. We have a gag order, which to me is totally unconstitutional. I'm not allowed to talk, but people are allowed to talk about me. So they can talk about me, they can say whatever they want, they can lie, but I'm not allowed to say anything. I just have to sit back and look at why a conflicted judge has ordered me to have a gag order. I don't think anybody's ever seen anything like this. I'd love to talk to you people. I'd love to say everything that's on my mind, but I'm restricted because I have a gag order. And I'm not sure that anybody's ever seen anything like this before. And even having to do with articles, somebody writes an article. If I read every one of these articles incomplete, I read some of it and I'll look at headlines, all good headlines, that the case is a sham. But I can't read the whole thing. I'd be reading, this is like reading a novel. So I put an article in, and then somebody's name is mentioned somewhere deep in the article, and I end up in violation of a gag order. I think it's a disgrace. It's totally unconstitutional. I don't believe it's never, not to this extent, ever happened before. I'm not allowed to defend myself, and yet other people are allowed to say whatever they want about me. Very, very unfair. Having to do with the schools and the closings, that's Biden's fault. And by the way, this trial is all Biden. You know, this is all Biden, just in case anybody has any question. And they're keeping me in a courtroom that's freezing, by the way, in a courtroom all day long. Well, he's out campaigning. That's probably an advantage because he can't campaign. Nobody knows what he's doing. He can't put two sentences together. But he's out campaigning. He's out campaigning, and I'm here in a courtroom, sitting here, sitting up as straight as I can all day long, because you know what? It's a very unfair situation. So we're locked up in a courtroom, and this guy's out there campaigning, if you call it a campaign. Every time he opens his mouth, he gets himself into trouble. So that's the story. I have an unconstitutional gag order by a highly conflicted judge that should recuse himself. Very simple. On the schools, should have never happened. What's going on in this country now should have never happened. But of course, the Ukraine war would have never happened. The Israeli attack would have never happened. Inflation would have never happened. We have the worst president in the history of our country, and he's the one that has us in all these different lawsuits. Thank you very much.
Fox News Alert, we are watching these live pictures out of New York City, Washington Square Park, NYU, where we are watching this walkout happening in real time. This new demonstration is happening after more than 100 arrested in New York City last night. We saw a growing number of protests emerge and erupt all over the city. The group here is a group called the NYU Palestine Solidarity Coalition. They're calling on students at New York University to walk out of their classes today following the anti-Israel protests that unfolded there last night. They're posting on Instagram for students to walk out of their classes at 1 p.m. Eastern time. We are obviously now in that hour, and head to Washington Square Park, which is just a couple blocks there, to reflect, debrief, and strategize, according to their post. Let's bring in Arkansas Republican Senator Tom Cotton on the breaking news as we do watch these pictures. Senator, what are your thoughts as you see this happening, and now to think you've got classes canceled at Columbia University? I mean, why can't they get a hold of this situation?
Well, Sandra, I gather there were about 100 people arrested last night at NYU. It seems like there may need to be even more arrests today. These university presidents need to ask the mayor and the chief of police in New York to send in New York City's finest to arrest anyone who's breaking the law, who's squatting on private property when they've been told to disperse, who's harassing or intimidating Jewish students in a nascent pogrom, and demand that students actually do what they're supposed to do on campus, which is go to school. And by the way, any of these students who are foreigners here on visas should immediately have their visas revoked by the Biden administration and be promptly deported. They have no right to be here. They certainly have no right to be here spewing anti-Semitic and anti-Israel filth.
Okay. We know it's up to the universities to call the police on their campuses, right? Private universities. However, there were students, we had one sitting on set here, two, I should say, on set here yesterday, Jewish students who they feel so threatened. Their rabbi on their campus at Columbia is telling them to go home. They see the only solution to bring in the National Guard. Do you think that's needed?
Well, Sandra, first off, it's not the university's prerogative whether or not the NYPD come onto their campus. It would certainly be welcome if the university presidents and their police forces would cooperate with the NYPD. But New York City has an obligation to enforce the law and to protect innocent civilians like those Jewish students. If there's a crime being committed in a private home, the police have every right to go into the home to stop the imminent crime from being committed. So they certainly have every right as well. And yes, I do agree that if Eric Adams won't send the NYPD to protect these Jewish students, if Kathy Hochul won't send the National Guard, Joe Biden has a duty to protect these Jewish students from what is a nascent pogrom on these campuses. These are scenes like you've seen out of the 1930s in Germany. They should never be witnessed or tolerated here in America in 2024.
Well, the group that we are seeing organize the current walkout that's on your screen here, and for our viewers to know, Washington Square Park, New York University, this group that's organizing this is demanding, quote, to end all war profiteering and investment in genocide, a complete academic boycott of Israel, it reads. The removal of NYPD on campus and that NYU must protect free speech on campus and provide full amnesty to all students and faculty penalized for their pro-Palestinian activism. So let me ask you this. Who's behind this?
Well, Sandra, that's a very good question. It's something the Department of Justice should look into. These encampments didn't just spring up spontaneously, and it looks to me like they've got some pretty expensive camping equipment out there as well. I think it's worth asking, who's funding these organizations violating the law? Is it left-wing activist groups? Is it foreign governments? The Department of Justice should get to the bottom of it. In fact, I just wrote, along with the majority of Republican senators, to the Attorney General and the Secretary of Education, who have an obligation to enforce civil rights laws, to include the protection of religious liberty on campuses, why they aren't taking action to stop these nascent pogroms, in addition to doing things like finding out where the funding is coming from and who's generating them. Again, they don't look just spontaneous to me when they're sitting out there in $500 camping tents.
Just a final question on that. Now those who were arrested overnight, the more than 100 of them that were, they're claiming the arrests were violent, but that the violence we faced is only a fraction of the violence that the Palestinians face on the ground every day. Who's winning here? I mean, this lawless behavior, they're stopping police vehicles from moving on the streets. How do you see this ending?
Well, I have confidence in the NYPD. They're some of America's finest. If there was any violent arrests, I suspect it's because they were facing violence themselves. Yes, there is civilian suffering and deaths in Gaza. That's 100% the fault of Hamas, who is using civilians as human shields, trying to increase civilian deaths. That's what these protesters should be protesting, is the crimes that Hamas is committing against its own people, not Israel, which is trying to defend itself from another murderous attack on the state of Israel, or provide safe haven for the Jewish people from exactly this kind of harassment and intimidation that you now see on some of today's campuses.
Yeah, and I just want to confirm for our audience, of the 133 demonstrators that were arrested last night, the NYPD tells us they used zip ties and flex cuffs to remove the protesters from the campus. They were then taken on a police bus to headquarters. They were charged with trespassing. And we are still waiting further reaction from the mayor on how he plans to proceed as we watch this live together. Senator Cotton, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Bring in Jonathan Shanzer, Senior Vice President at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and former counterterrorism analyst at the U.S. Treasury Department. So we heard the Deputy Police Commissioner, Daughtry, talking about this. The Mayor of New York, Eric Adams, talked about it as well. He said, why is everybody the same? Was there a fire sale on those tents? So there's some organizing going on, a concerted organizing effort. What's the goal of that organizing? That's what we need to be asking ourselves, and of using discussion terminology. Does this to you in your previous investigations appear to be a coordinated effort that's being funded by outside sources.
Absolutely. We've been watching this network now for the last 10 years at Foundation for Defense of Democracies. We started looking into who was behind this group known as Students for Justice in Palestine. And what we found was that there was an organization, an umbrella organization known as AMP, American Muslims for Palestine. They were previously based in Chicago, now based here in Falls Church, Virginia. They are the ones that created this network to begin with. It started with just a handful of campuses. There's now 200 campuses that have SJP. They use a lot of the same rhetoric. They use a lot of the same devices on campuses, the different means of protests. There is a lot of commonality that we see nationwide. They have been wielded as a student army by this group, and we're now seeing it reach a fever pitch.
And who is funding them?
Well, that's an interesting question because AMP is a corporate not-for-profit. It's not a C3. They have a fiscal sponsor called Americans for Justice in Palestine. You get a sense of there's a lot of obfuscation going on. There's also there's a nonprofit in White Plains, New York called Westpac that gives to Students for Justice in Palestine. An obfuscated money trail, to put it mildly, but we can see that there are organizers behind all of this, and then a broader network of organizations that are supporting it as well.
And what's the ultimate goal?
Well, I think really it's to put political pressure on Biden.
Yeah.
But before Biden, I mean, the pressure was there for Trump. It was there for Obama. The idea is to wield that political pressure as much as possible. And we're seeing tactics that really do look like the 1960s revisited.
And they're promising to disrupt the DNC convention in Chicago this coming August, shades of 1968 and the Vietnam War protests. In terms of putting pressure on Biden, it seems to be working, because listen to what he said when he was asked about the anti-Semitic protests on college campuses. Listen here.
I condemn the anti-Semitic protests. That's why I've set up a program to deal with that. I also condemn those who don't understand what's going on with the Palestinians.
A lot of people are saying that is his very fine people on both sides moment, you know, is in the same way that Donald Trump was criticized for that, even though Trump went on to explain that he wasn't supporting white supremacists or neo-Nazis.
Yeah, and you can see right now that the president is kind of having a bipolar moment as it comes to the Israeli war effort in Gaza. On the one hand, we're now supporting with additional funding this very just war that the Israelis are fighting. And at the same time, they're talking about issuing sanctions or withholding certain funds from units that are operating in the IDF, the very same army that we're looking to fund here. The president is trying to figure out how to walk a fine line. I think the message is muddled right now, and I do wonder whether these campus agitators have a role.
So the president is walking a fine line. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez just looked at that line and walked right over it. Listen to what she said at the same event that the president was at yesterday in Virginia. Listen here.
It is especially important that we remember the power of young people shaping this country today, of all days, as we once again witness the leadership of those peaceful student-led protests on campuses like Columbia, Yale, Berkeley, and many others.
So she described them as peaceful student-led protests. This is the way the White House described those over the weekend. This blatant anti-Semitism is reprehensible and dangerous, and it has absolutely no place on college campuses or anywhere in our country. Ocasio-Cortez seems to be going, go team, I'm with you.
Yeah, she does seem to be saying that, but it's also amazing because she's the first person to admit that she doesn't really understand this conflict very well. I mean, she said so publicly, so she's out there supporting these protesters and the anti-Semitic rhetoric that they're spouting, while she doesn't, I mean, she will admit that she doesn't understand what she's talking about. It's really remarkable.
Well, what was it that Mark Twain said about 'tis better to keep one's mouth shut? And, well, Jonathan? Good to see you. Thank you. That was former President Donald Trump moments ago speaking to reporters after court finished for the day about the gag order that he has got against him. So far, the judge holding off on ruling whether or not Trump has violated that order. Let's bring in Carrier Bond, Fox News legal editor, just back from New York. So you spent the day yesterday, of what there was of it, in court, watching all of the proceedings. You've been watching it all today, and you are still left with the same question. And that is?
What is the crime? I sat there thinking, I don't know what the crime is. former number 3 from DOJ was presenting or opening arguments on behalf of the state, which also was very surprising, by the way. And he was saying, this is election fraud, pure and simple. And I sat there thinking, well, what's election fraud exactly? Because one, entering into a non-disclosure agreement is not illegal. It's not. Whether it's with a porn star or anyone else, maybe it's seedy, maybe it's unseemly, but it's not. Secondly, catch and kill schemes, which people in the media do, which is to buy the rights to a story and then choose not to publish it, they're also not illegal. So those are the kinds of things we're talking about in this case. So I'm not quite sure. I don't really
And then there was the
problem
payments to Cohen, the reimbursements to Cohen, which weren't made until after he was president. And Cohen was paid way more than Cohen ever laid out to keep Stormy Daniels quiet.
He was. Now, the state would say, well, that was part of their elaborate cover-up. But again, what's the cover-up? Because paying someone in return for an NDA is not illegal. And then labeling it in a ledger as a legal expense, well, isn't it a legal expense? What else would you say it is? Other than if the state, I guess, wants him to say reimbursement for X, Y, and Z. But it's also unclear, and I think the defense team is arguing this, that Trump even knew how it was labeled in the book. Apparently it was made by somebody else, a lower-level associate at Trump Tower, who was told to do so by her boss. So again, this just leaves us with, what is the problem exactly?
Yeah. All right. So the other big issue in all of this is the gag order against Trump. And he doesn't like it at all. Here's what the Wall Street Journal opinion said about it. So the witness can go on national TV and call the defendant a liar, but the defendant can't reply that the witness is a liar. The asymmetry doesn't bolster the trial's integrity or its sense of fairness. How is it possibly fair in modern society for everybody else to say everything that they want about this case, but the guy who's on trial can't?
I don't know, and the fact that Michael Cohen continues to speak out, I think he did so even yesterday about Donald Trump. He has a podcast where he talks about Donald Trump, apparently obsessively, and yet no gag order imposed against him. And, Trump makes an interesting argument about this is an unconstitutional restraint of political speech, because what he argues, and I think it's an interesting argument, is that everything he's saying right now is political because this is only happening to him because he's running for president, and everything matters. And we all know that when you're running for office, everything you say matters for a campaign. And it's interesting. Let's not forget the ACLU, no friend of Donald Trump's, last year in the civil fraud trial filed an amicus brief also arguing that a gag order against Trump was unconstitutional and a problem.
Oh, they've got to be consistent. They can't always be political. There was another development in the documents case, and that is that the judge released 400 pages of investigative records, among them an interview with a Trump associate who apparently warned Trump, give the stuff back. This person is quoted as saying, whatever you have, give everything back. Let them come here and get everything. Don't give them a noble reason to indict you, because they will. There was also a minute-by-minute timeline of the FBI search and an FBI memo that memorializes the fact that Merrick Garland signed off on this being elevated to a full investigation.
Yeah, this is just really unfortunate in terms of it being an unnecessary and unforced error by the former president. That advice that he was given by whomever was interviewing with the FBI was correct. Just give them the documents back. It's not worth it.
You surprised me with what the original archives request was for, and it was for 3 things.
They only wanted 3 things. This is how this all began, which is why it's really unfortunate that this is how where it's gotten to. They asked for the Kim Jong-un letter. Remember that letter? They asked for a letter that former President Obama had left in the White House for President Trump on his first day, which is tradition. And then third, there was a map during the Hurricane Dorian. You probably were sitting there.
That he drew on with a Sharpie.
That he drew on with a Sharpie.
I was in the Oval Office that day.
So they only asked for those 3 things. And for months, Trump and his team gave them the runaround. And so as they were doing that, the people at the archives got frustrated and thought, oh, well, there must be other stuff. Wait, we think there's classified information, too. Turns out there was. And then this all led to a subpoena, which led to a raid. And here we are.
So this all started with 2 letters and a hurricane forecast map.
Yep.
Wow. Gary, that's why we love having you on. You give us all this fabulous information.
In the soft embrace of morning light, rocky and rugged, hopefully sight, a whisper of promise, a sense so sweet, reviving energy with every heartbeat. Oh yeah, stumbling down the stairs with grace, favorite moment, cherished embrace. dance of enchantment. Caffeine's elixir, a daily enchantment. Coffee in the morning, my lifeline. Guiding through life's chaotic design, finding every sip of morning zest. In that brew, I find my best. The morning sun, a gentle caress, bathing the world in warmth no less. A symphony of flavors in every pore, awakening senses, a ritual to adore. The kitchen hums a quiet tune as dreams unfold not too soon. Pouring the elixir, stories take flight. In the world of coffee, my spirit alights. A mug cradled, a vessel of tales. Each sip, a dialogue as morning unveils. Bitterness, a new world of tales. As the day unfolds, a caffeinated tale in morning symphony, where moments prevail. Coffee, my companion in the sunrise quest, in the ritual of morning, my eternal zest. The world awakens, a canvas so bright, in the palette of dawn, a captivating sight. A dance of flavors, a morning trance. In the world of coffee, life's sweet romance.